Yeah. Listen to the Zoom from Brother Ernie's house.
On my phone, if you're not charging it,
Your phone is perfectly.
so can I have it?
Oh,
See there.
ST voicemail, ST.
I already got it.
First call. 35 minutes ago.
I texted her back.
She wants you to arrive.
I need to move back a little.
Huh?
And I see I need to move it back a little.
What
I
do you
need
want?
to move it back a little bit to see.
Move back.
But not from here, do it here.
Move here.
To move my seat back.
Start on this side.
No, no, just do it from here.
Why?
Stop, stop, stop. Stop. Close the room door.
Hmm?
Close the door to the room.
I should go close the door.
Close the door. Close the door.
All the way. Make sure you take it somewhere to your room. You always know how to leave it so who else, but they don't.
So badly, but that's the place where the crack went. I'm so afraid that all the turning they do with me shouldn't split open. He said it was pretty stable, but
Hi, Gerard.
Hello, Chaim.
How's Marlene doing?
Here in the room, in the hospital.
Send her our best.
I
For
will.
Shalema, we hope she gets well soon.
Thank you.
Hi, Gerard. Oh. Ah. Are you awake, Gerard?
Yeah, I think I am.
Oh, okay.
Bernie, Marty left you a book. I have it with me. I hope you enjoy it.
So is it one of his Western specials?
I don't know. I need a piece of junk.
I can give you one of Ernie's heavy duty books. Guns, Germs, and Steel. Did you read that book?
I diamond.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sir.
it's hard getting through.
Try to get through it, especially the third one is better. You go 3 books. Third one's a better book. I just got 4 books in the mail. November 9th is when Amazon sends out all the big sellers, the best sellers. So 4 fiction. One's on the medieval ages. It's one like 1,000, 1,200 pages each. I love those big books. I never finish it. I just enjoy holding a big book.
Did Marlene get resituated?
Yeah, she's here. I'm in the hospital room. I'm in the hospital.
Wow,
Rehab.
Rehab.
that's good. I'm happy to hear that, Marlene.
Yeah, for so many weeks in the hospital, but even another 2 weeks in rehab. We're talking about 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
No, no.
He's the Rebbe.
Hello, who is this? Oh, Jeff, yeah. Welcome.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. Chaim, did you get your money or did your wife not tell you?
No, I have it. Thank you.
Okay,
We're good.
117.
What? 17?
I gave her 117.
117, right?
Hi, Jerry. How are you? Bernie,
Ah, hello there,
how are you?
Jeff. Nice to see you.
I sent an email that the shear's at 8:15.
No, you said 8 o'clock.
No, I said 8:15. Look at your email.
Okay, I'll tell everybody.
Everyone got an email.
I have already 7 people, 8 people here.
Okay, but let me ask you a question. Did everyone get the email?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know about an email. You sent an email or a text?
An email.
Okay, let me see. You put 8:15. You send it at 6:30. Okay. Obviously.
I'm gonna be there in 5 minutes. Keep everybody on the line.
Okay.
I'll be there if I tell them I sent an email saying it's 8:15.
Apologize. I sent an email. Maybe I sent it a little too late that it was 8:15. I grew up in Los Angeles, and the cantor who was very influential in my personal life as well as many other people's lives was Cantor Binyamin Glickman, who passed away just recently. So his shloshim is going to be next week, and Beth Jacob is having an old time choir. All of us I sang in the choir when I was in 4th grade till I was about 9th grade or 8th grade, till your bar mitzvah. And Benny Adler and Sammy Mark and many of the Jay Braun. So there was a rehearsal tonight because there's going to be the davening next week at Beth Jacob with this old choir. So I apologize. So we left off, by the way, welcome to Harav Jeff Astroff. What a wonderful new addition to our group.
I didn't realize I was going to be the bacher here.
And anyways, welcome to the Tzurba M'Rabanan. Abe, by the way, we missed you Sunday night. I have your to Uda, so we'll have to figure out some way to get you. Jeff, this group just made a siyum they finished one of the chalokim of Shulchan Aruch is Yoredeya. which is all the prohibit, isser veheter, things that are permitted, things that are prohibited, like kashrus, the laws of nida, and all of the very complicated laws. So that's what this group did a siyum on Sunday night.
Mazel tov.
Now, of course, we've started Orech Chaim, and we have just finished the Hilchos of Netilas Yadayim, and we started last week Hilchos Tzitzis, and we're right in the midst of that sugya. So we're on page 107, Ksus Yom and Ksus Laila. Ksus refers to a clothing, meaning daytime clothing versus nighttime clothing. Since there's an aspect of tzitzis, it says uri'isem also. You have to see it. So there's a debate in the Gemara and later on by the Rishonim whether or not clothing from nighttime is going to be obligated with tzitzis. So another related question regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis and the scope of the obligation relates to the timing of the mitzvah. Does the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis apply at night or just in the daytime? Does it depend upon whether the garment which is subject to the obligation is designed to be worn specifically during the day or night? For example, if you have a garment only for night, maybe it's not going to be mechuyev in tzitzis. So we need to study the following passage from the Gemara Menachos, where the laws of tzitzis are located. The Gemara states that a nighttime garment, a ksus laila, is exempt from the obligation of tzitzis because the words in the parsha, uri'isem oso, you will see it. For this reason, Reb Shimon rules that women are exempt, since tzitzis are considered a time-bound mitzvah, meaning if tzitzis would be obligated day and night, so a day and night obligation is an obligation that's obligated all the time. If it's only obligated in the day and not at night, it becomes a mitzvah sazeh shazman grama. It becomes a positive commandment that's tied to time. And we know the general rule that mitzvahs that are tied to time, women are patur from. So because of this din in tzitzis, women are not chayiv to put on tzitzis. Says the Gemara Masechta Menachos Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. Reb Shimon poiter benashim. Reb Shimon said that women are not obligated. My time at Reb Shimon. Where did Reb Shimon get this? The Tanya. Uri'isam oso, you shall see it. Prat, to exempt l'ksus laila. Exempts a garment that is worn only at night. Ata oimer prat l'ksus laila. Does it mean it exempts a garment like a pajama made it for night? O eino ela prat l'ksus summa. Maybe any garments that a blind person wears would not be obligated in tzitzis. That means the Gemara could have rejected, had a choice to reject one of two things. It could reject a nighttime garment like a pajama, or it could reject clothing worn by a blind person because a blind person can't see them. Maybe a blind person would be potter from tzitzis. So kishu oimer asher techaseba. One of the words that relate to the mitzvah tzitzis is that which you cover yourself with. So clothing that you cover with yourself with are going to be obligated in tzitzis. Harek susuma omer. Well, a blind person wears clothing, covers himself with clothing, doesn't walk around without clothing. So therefore, a blind person's clothing falls under the rubric of tzitzis. So hama ani makayim uri'isam oso. Well, the Torah wrote uri'isam oso for a reason. It doesn't. Every word in the Torah is written for a reason. So if it says you shall see it, it must come to teach me a halachic nafkamina. The halachic nafkamina is prat l'ksus laila. It's to exempt a garment that's made to wear at night from the mitzvah of tzitzis. The Gemara still is bothered. Technically, from a logical point of view, why did you reject summa and not ksus laila? Marbani ksus summa sheyeshna beria, it's lacherim. You know why? Other people can see the garments that a blind person wears. He can't see them, but they are seeable. But clothing worn at night, nobody can see them. Because at night, if there's no illumination, nobody can see the garments. So that fits better as the exemption from something that's mechuyev in tzitzis. So according to Reb Shimon, and we see in the Gemara that there's no one who argues with Reb Shimon, a ksus laila or nighttime garment is potter from the mitzvah of tzitzis. However, the Gemara does not explain the precise definition of a ksus laila. It just says ksus laila. Does it refer to any garment that is traditionally worn at night, such as a modern day pajama, a night shirt, or think about, I always think about in the movie A Christmas Carol, Lahavdil, a Kratzmach Carol, whatever, where, what's that guy, the old guy, the Scrooge, is taken on a tour at night by, the past and the future, and he wears that night shirt, and he's taken everywhere wearing, that's a very typical thing that you can think about as a ksus laila, a night shirt in the old vernacular. We don't have things like that, but that's very typical. Does it refer to, right, such as a modern day pajama, or does it refer to an exemption of all garments when they are worn at night? For example, you wear a tuxedo to a ball, but you wear it at night, maybe that's a ksus laila and should be exempt from tzitzis, regardless of what type of garment it is. So the Rishonim dispute the answer to this question. So according to the Rosh, let's just remind ourselves, the Rosh he initially started off in France, but moved to Toledo in Spain and became the Rosh Hador. He lived in about 1350. And in the back of every Gemara, you'll see the Rosh. And the Rosh wrote, Piskei HaRosh, he didn't write all the various Agaditas in the Gemara, he just brought the halachic material. So the Rosh is one of the early codifiers.
So Ernie,
yes,
according to the Rosh, so Isha should be mechuyav in tzitzit, because ksut yom chayav also balayla. And if it's ksut laila, is potter also beyom.
So let's just see. Let me read the Rosh. According to the Rosh, as cited by the Tur, now the Tur is Rav Yaakov ben Arosh.
Right, the Tur, I mean, according to
the Tur, son of the Rosh, so he lived 1400, 1420. So he was the first one, the Tur, to divide the halachas into Yoredeya, Orech Chaim, Choshen Mishpat, and Even HaEzer. The Shulchan Aruch, who lived 1470 in Tzvat, and finally wrote the Shulchan Aruch, used the Tur's four divisions. So the Rosh says a garment generally worn only at night is exempt from tzitzis, but a daytime garment would be subject to the obligation even if worn at night. So that's what the Rosh says. So let's see the Tur bringing it. Va'adoni Avizal, right? The Tur, Rav Yaakov ben Arosh says, my father, the Rosh, explained that when it says ksus laila, it refers to a garment specifically only worn at night. So if you wore a pajama, in the daytime, you also wouldn't have to be put tzitzis on it. A nighttime garment is potter from tzitzis, whether you wear it in the daytime, whether you wear it at nighttime, according to Rosh. But a garment that you wear in the daytime, or both, there are garments that you wear in liyom v'layla, chayav afilu lov shebalayla, v'yesh levarach alav. So David, it could be that since there's a period of time where there's going to be a tour, well, maybe, so you want to say it's hard, according to the Rosh, to understand why would a woman be potter, because it's not a zman, it's really defining the garment. Let's see how we paskin though. In contrast, the Rambam holds, the Rambam lived about 1200, also in Cordoba, Spain, but eventually moved to Egypt, was eventually buried in Tveria. And he, of course, wrote the Yad HaChazaka, which is, again, the Shulchan Aruch used 3 Rishonim in coming up with his Psak Halacha. The Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rif. He would oftentimes do 2 out of 3. That means, how did he paskin? So he would see how did the Rambam paskin and the Rif and the Rosh, and 2 out of 3 is usually how the Shulchan Aruch paskin. That's a general rule. It's not always like that. And the Beis Yosef, who is the commentator and the Tur, who is also Rav Yosef Karo, he from learning the Beis Yosef, we'll see exactly why the Shulchan Aruch ended up paskin the way he did, because he goes into length into bringing these Rishonim in the Beis Yosef. So the Rambam holds that one does not recite a bracha upon donning tzitzis at night, and it seemingly is not a mitzvah either, regardless of what type of garment is one, though he states that it is permitted to wear them at night. So, l'chora, David, Rambam clearly holds that the nighttime is a period where there's no chiyuv tzitzis, so that would fit the issue of for women. Let's just see the Rambam inside.
Ernie, I thought isn't the whole thing that you're supposed to be able to see them and you're supposed to be able to tell a techeles from a distance? Isn't that the whole idea with tzitzit? That's why you don't wear them at night?
So
Later.
yeah, re'isem oso. So right now, Jeff asks a good point. Right now, they're using a re'isem oso to reject either a certain garment, or they're going to decide it might refer to a time period, the whole night, no matter what you wear. So
Okay.
that's right now is a machlokas between the Rosh and the Rambam, in terms of whether a garment is potter or whether the whole period of time is potter, because of the issue that you can't see it.
That's the machlokas in the Nachos.
And that's the machlokas as well. Nobody really argued with Rav Shimon. But they brought the question is, there they wanted to exempt clothing worn by a blind person, which is bechlal, a whole different get there. I mean, since the blind person can't see his clothing, there was a havamina that maybe he should be potter.
Right.
But then we said, no, since other people can see it, then it's considered that we don't exempt it for that reason.
Right. But the basis is a Risa also.
Say it again? The basis
The
is
basis is a Risa
absolutely.
also.
Absolutely. So the Rambam says, Mutter la'adam lilbosh tzitzis b'layla. Person is allowed to wear tzitzis at night, bein b'chol, bein b'shabbos. V'afal pi she'ein zmana, even though it's not its time. U'v'vat shelo yivarech. You should not make a bracha. And it says you're allowed to wear it, but it certainly doesn't say chayiv adam. So it's clearly not a mitzvah, according to the Rambam. V'chol zman shemisatev bo bayom, mavarch alav kodem sheyisatev. When you wear it during the daytime, of course, you have to make a bracha. So how do we paskin? How does the Shulchan Aruch paskin? We are Shulchan Aruch Jews. Eventually, once the Shulchan Aruch came out, and with Rav Moshe Isserlich from Krakow's glosses on the Mechaber, since the Mechaber really wrote for the Sfardim, the Ramo who lived in Krakow lived in more northern Europe. So once that Shulchan Aruch came out, it became the accepted halacha book. And regardless of how the Rosh paskin or the Rif paskin or the Rambam paskin, we paskin like the Shulchan Aruch primarily. So how did the Shulchan Aruch eventually paskin? Part of the beauty of Tzurba is that it shows us, it doesn't show us the halacha. It shows us how the halacha developed. How did we get to the halacha? From the Gemara, through the Rishonim, to the Shulchan Aruch. And then, of course, there's a lot of modification after the Shulchan Aruch on the super commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch presents both opinions of the Rambam and the Rosh without clearly taking a side. The Ramah adds that due to this controversy, one should not recite a bracha in any case of uncertainty. We know this. Brachas are always rabbinic. There's two brachas that are midoraisa. Birchas HaTorah, Birchas HaMazon. That's it. All other brachas the rabbis created. If you shake a lulav without saying the bracha, you have the mitzvah of lulav. The bracha is a rabbinic thing that you should make a bracha before you do a mitzvah. Also, you're not allowed to eat something. If you eat something without making a bracha, you're goyzel from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the institution of the bracha is a rabbinic. Therefore, the principle of safek, when you're in doubt. So when you have a machlokes rishonim, and you're not sure exactly what, that brings up a safek. It's a doubt then what the halacha should be. So the rule is, if it's a Torah law, safek doraisa, we go l'chumra. You have a piece of meat here. You don't know whether it's kosher or not kosher. We go l'chumra, you don't eat it. However, if you have a question, should you make a bracha, should you not make a bracha? Since brachas are rabbinic, we're lahakel, we don't say the bracha. We don't do it. Because you don't want to say the Shem of Hashem if you didn't need to. So we're always lenient when it comes to brachas. So, Laila says the Shulchan Aruch loves man tzitzisu. So the Shulchan Aruch seems to be going like the Rambam in a way, who says that Laila is not the time of tzitzis. The imoit me v'ri'isam oso la Rambam. The The Rambam excludes nighttime because of, like Jeffrey said, so you can't see it. Kol ma shelovish b'layla potter. And therefore, anything that you wear at night, it's potter. Afilu hu muyuchad liyom. Even if it's a daytime clothing item. So it seems like it's not like the Rosh. But here is where he goes. That which he wears in the daytime, that he wears, that which he wears during the daytime, even if it's mechil l'layla la rosh, ksusam yuch l'layla potter. But according to the Rosh, any pajama potter, uksusam yuch l'yom v'layla chayiv. However, afilu lov shabalayla if you worn at night. By the way, look in the footnote number 6. A third position is taken by the Ran. The Ran lived in Girona, in Spain as well, and is also a major Rishon. You'll find the Ran in the back of most Masechtos, giving commentary on the Rif. So the Ran suggests that the obligation only takes effect when both factors, daytime beged and worn during the day, are present. Thus, both the ksus yom worn at night. For example, if you have some kind of daytime clothing item that you wore at night, or a ksus laila worn in the daytime, would not be subject to the mitzvah. On a practical level, this is similar to the ruling of the Ramah, which we're going to get to. But the Ramah's consideration is one of Safek brachos, while the Ran is a fundamental one within the parameters of the mitzvah, like the Rosh and the Rambam.
Ernie, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
Does this mean, if you hold that you don't have to wear them at night, does this mean you could wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzis?
Yes.
Even though there's a mitzvah to wear tzitzis on a four-cornered garment?
There's no mitzvah at night. That mitzvah is only in the daytime when you can see it.
Oh, wow.
We'll see in a minute about wearing tzitzis at night. It's going to come tonight. Let's say what the Ramah says. Safek brachas lahakil, al kain ein levarach alav. You don't make a bracha on tzitzis, ela k'shalovish b'yom. If you wear tzitzis in the daytime, the humiyuchad gam kain liyom. And it's a garment that you wear during the daytime. Given that, according to the Rosh, a daytime garment would still be subject to the obligation of tzitzis at night. So, and given that ideally a person should wear tzitzis all the time, is it proper or necessary to go to sleep wearing one's tzitzis? It would seem that the strict halacha is that one does not need to do so, as the Ramah writes in the following source. Yesha kosvu, shenagu shelo lishka v'tala sheyesh bo tzitzis. There are those that write you should not go to sleep wearing your tzitzis. Although this opinion is only quoted in the name of Yesh Omrim, some write, the Ramah does not cite any dissenting authorities, indicating that sleeping with tzitzis is not necessary. On the other hand, the Mishnah Brura brings the opinion of the Arizal that on a Kabbalistic level, it's appropriate to sleep in one's tzitzis. Uvikizvei Arizal, kasuv al pi asod, sod is based on mysticism, sheyesh lishkav b'layla b'talis cotton. You should go to sleep with your Arba Kanfas. Thus, it seems that practically both customs are legitimate and may be followed. Look at footnote number 8 or 7. Pischei Tshuva explains that the reason for this is being that tzitzis is a great skula to save oneself from impure forces at night and protects one body and soul. The Arizal attempts to prove his position from a statement of the Gemara Menachos 43b that King David cried out when entering the bathhouse that he was naked without any mitzvah since he removed his tzitzis. Though the Gemara does not state that he made the same exclamation every night when he went to sleep. This indicates that he did in fact wear tzitzis when sleeping. However, the Magen Avram is a super commentary on Orech Chaim and Eliyahu Rabbah. They lived in the 1700s, 1800s, who dismissed the proof of the Arizal. Rav Vosner in the Shevet HaLevi also suggests that even the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is wrote the Shulchan Aruch Harav, who writes that it is permitted to sleep in a tzitzis garment, who often follows the Arizal, holds that wearing tzitzis while sleeping is permitted, but it's not a mitzvah. So we see the various opinions.
So the idea that tzitzis is a skula, that's quoted in the Pischei Tshuva, that doesn't only apply to sleeping with it, it applies to wearing it at night as well. Some people wear tzitzis, let's say if they come home at night, they still put on tzitzis or they don't take them off, or they go out at night for the skula. So it's not only sleeping, it's just wearing it at night in general.
Correct. Absolutely. Page 110. What kind of garments required tzitzis? Is it all garments made of any material? Right? An important question concerning the obligation of tzitzis relates to the parameters of the garments that are included in the obligation. The Torah, which we went through the sources in both places, says that a person must affix tzitzis on the corners of their bigdeihem, their garments, as well as on the four corners of your garments, ksuscha. So what are the halachic definitions of the term beged and ksus, which are specified as subject to tzitzis? The Gemara Menachos discusses the status of garments made of assorted materials, such as linen, right, made of flax, wool from sheep, and silk. And which of these are subject to the mitzvah of tzitzis according to Torah law? Silk made its way from China across the Silk roads. There was active trading already. China already, in the 1000 BC, in a very early period of time, was already mastered the art of making silk from worms, and there was already active travel, certainly in the time of the Gemara, and in the time of Bayesheni, that silk material was coming from China to the Near East and to parts of Europe. So, Amar Achvam Rav Yehuda, Chutei Tzemer, Poitrin B'Shel Pishtan. If you make tzitzis out of wool, it'll pater a garment made out of linen. B'Shel Pishtan, Poitrin B'Shel Tzemer. Having the strings, the tzitzis strings made out of linen, will pater a wool garment. Now, if you made tzitzis together of Chutei Tzemer Upishtim, if your tzitzis was a combination of wool and linen, now, you guys are going to jump and say, what do you mean? Combination of wool and linen, isn't that shatnez? Yeah, but it says lo tilbash shatnez, gdilim taselach. The mitzvah saseh of tzitzis overrides the negative commandment of shatnez. So you're allowed to have tzitzis made out of shatnez. So chutei tzemer upishtim poitrin b'chol makom will pater any garment, vafilu b'shiroyin, even if you have a garment made out of silk, the tzitzis made out of wool and linen will pater the silk garment.
What does that mean? It'll pater it, Ernie?
That means you fulfilled
the obligation.
You fulfilled your obligation.
Okay.
It will work. Upligid Rav Nachman, but this is in contradistinction to Rav Nachman. Dam Rav Nachman, Hashiroyin, Tuaminat tzitzis. Rav Nachman says silk garments don't need tzitzis. You can wear a four-cornered silk garment and no problem. You don't have to put tzitzis on it. That's what Rav Nachman says. Eisvei Rav Nachman. So Rava asked a question to Rav Nachman. Hashiroyin, silk, va'klach, va'asrikin, these are different materials. Kulon chayevin b'tzitzis. They're all chayiv in tzitzis. How can Rav Nachman say they're potter? Rav Nachman will answer midrabanan. That means min Torah, they're exempt. Rabbinically, we require tzitzis. Rava Rami. But Rava doesn't stop. Rava showed a contradiction. Ksiv aknaf, the corner, min knaf. Uksiv, it's also written, Semer upishtim yachdav, that the tzitzis have to be made out of wool and linen. HaKetzad. How do we understand? That means the haknaf min knaf would imply that the strings of the tzitzis have to be made on the same material that's in the corner. You might have had a garment that, for example, the garment itself is wool, but the corners were made out of linen. So from haknaf, you would think that the tzitzis have to be made of the garment that's in the corner, min knaf. But it says semru pishtim. Maybe that means I could use either. So haketzad semru pishtim poitrin bein b'min and bein shalomina. Wool and linen have the power to fulfill the obligation of tzitzis for garments that are made of wool or linen, and also have the power to fulfill the obligation for other garments that are not wool and linen. Now, if you make tzitzis out of other meaning, shar meaning, for example, if you made tzitzis out of silk, right? B'minan p'turin, silk fringes would pater silk garments. But shalom b'minan ain't poitrin. But if you tried to hang silk fringes on a wool garment, it would not work. Now, the Gemara continues. Rav Nachman kidetan Rabbi Shmuel. Rav Nachman's shita is like the yeshiva Rabbi Shmuel. Hoyel v'nemer b'godim b'Torah stam. The Torah just wrote the word beged. It didn't define what kind of beged. In one of the psukim related to tzitzis, it did tell us what kind of garment, and it's specifically mentioned wool and linen. So I've called semer upishtim. So that means semer upishtim have the ability to pater other garments. This Tana is different from another Tana of Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana of Rabbi Shmuel, beged, it says the word garment. Ainly ala beged semer. I might think only woolen garments. If camel hair or rabbit hair or goat hair, how do I know that they need tzitzis as well? V'aklach, v'sirok, and v'shrem, silk, and these other garments. O beged. So the O beged is an inclusion to say all garments required tzitzis. So the Tzurba analyzes this Gemara in the following way, page 111. In the first stage of the discussion, the Gemara notes a dispute between Rav Yehuda and Rava and Rav Nachman about whether silk is subject to tzitzis midoraisa, or mainly only midrabanan, right? Rava thought it was midoraisa. Rav Nachman said only midrabanan. In the later stage, the Gemara addresses an apparent contradiction. We brought two shitas of the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel. According to the first source, the school of Rabbi Shmuel holds that only garments made of wool or linen are subject to tzitzis by Torah law. And all other garments would not, you would require tzitzis but only rabbinically. According to the second source, all garments are subject to tzitzis midoraisa. So now we understand why the Rishonim were so important. How do we take this Gemara and how do we paskin for ourselves what the halach is? The Rishonim disagree regarding the resolution of the Gemara's debate and the accepted halacha. According to the Rif, who lived in North Africa, who's one of the trio, the triumvirate that we talked about, right? The Rosh, the Rif, the Rambam, that the Shulchan Aruch relied on. According to the Rif and the Rambam, the halacha is like Rav Nachman, that garments made of material other than linen or wool are subject to the obligation of tzitzis only on a rabbinic level. Let's see the Rambam inside. A garment that the Torah requires you to put tzitzis on is a garment that has 4 corners or more than 4 corners. The garment has to be made of wool or linen to be machayev tzitzis midoraisa. Aval talit, says the Rambam, shel shar minim, a garment made out of other material, could go on big day meshi, silk, u big day tzemer gefen, cotton, u big day tzemer gemalim, camel hair, the tzemer anavim, rabbit hair, the nutza shalizim, goat hair, the kiyotze behem, ein chayavim b'mitzvah tzitzis elam edivrei chachamim, says the Rambam. The mitzvah of tzitzis on those material would only be rabbinic. Kedei lizar b'mitzvah tzitzis. The reason why the chachamim made sure that you put it on every beged is to make sure that you guard the mitzvah, that you'll never walk around with a wool or linen garment without tzitzis, because you're putting tzitzis on all your garments. The Rambam learns that when the Torah refers to beged, it usually refers to either linen or wool. By contrast, most Rishonim from France and Ashkenaz, Germany, including Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, and the Rosh. Remember, I told you the Rosh started off in France, but he moved to Toledo at the end of his life. He became the Gadol Hador in Toledo. But he really started off as Ashkenaz. So these Rishonim adopt the position of Rav Yehuda and Rava, according to which garments made of materials other than wool and linen are also subject to Torah law. Let's see the Russian side. Rabbeinu Tam posak the Hilchos Karava dehu Basra. Rabbeinu Tam said we paskin like Rava. Why? Rava was a later Amoira. In the Gemara, we have multiple generations of Amoiroim. So the last Tana was Rebbe. The first generation of Amoira was, for example, Rav and Rav Chia and Shmuel. And then further, maybe the third, fourth generation was Rabbah and Rav Yosef. And then finally, the next generation was Abai and Rava. So the Rabbeinu Tam, one of the Balei Tosfos, one of the most important Balei Tosfos, teach us a rule in Psak that we always follow the later Amora. And since Rava was later than Rav Nachman, we paskin like Rava. Duhu Basra, he was later. V'chein posek Rashi Zal b'tshuva. Rashi also had shuvas. He paskin like Rav as well. Afal gav the Tana Rav Shmuel Rav Nachman. Halacha Karava. Even though we brought the proof of the Rav Nachman Shita that other garments are only rabbinic, and we had a Tana very Shmuel. That's a Tana. That's Tanaitic literature. Usually, if we had a Mishnah that supported an Amoira, we would say, oh, we have to paskin like that Amoira. That's why the Rosh makes a big point. Afal Gav, even though there's a Tana, like Rav Nachman Halacha Karava. The Temahu. And it's a wonder. Lama Pasuk Harav Ilfis, the Rif, Zal, Karav Nachman. Kirkivan de Rabim Pligi Ale. There were many other Amiroim that argued with Rav Nachman. It wasn't just Rava. Rav Yehuda, Rachva, Rava. Now, Imishum Tanav Rabbi Shmuel, maybe the Rosh is arguing. Maybe the Rif went along with Rav Nachman because of this fact that there was a Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel. Well, Hayekatan Rabbi Shmuel, Acher the Savar Kavasayu. But remember, we brought two versions of the same Tana Rabbi Shmuel, so it wasn't that authoritative that he could rely on it, because there seemed to be a stira between the two Tana Rabbi Shmuels. The Kabar Abaya that we saw, Abaya said, Hay Tana Rabbi Shmuel, Mafka Meidach Tana Rabbi Shmuel, that they were in contrast. So wow, we could see how the Rosh ended up pasking like Rava. The Rosh bases his decision upon two arguments. First, Rava post-dates the other Amorai mentioned in the discussion. Thus, halacha accords with Rava. On the basis of the principle of the Gaonim, the halacha is in accordance with the later authority. So the Talmud was redacted and closed in the year about 400 in Bavel by Ravina and Ravashi, the last generation of the Amoraim. The next 600 years, from 500 to 1000, is called the Gaonic period. These were great scholars who lived in Sura and Pumbedisa, the two great yeshiva towns in Bavel. And we know those Gaonim, Rav Hai Gaon, Rav Shrira Gaon, probably the most famous, Rav Sadia Gaon. So this is in the year 700, 800, 900. These Gaonim received letters, tshuvas, from all over the world, the Jewish world. Where were they living? Some lived in Germany at that time, because there are letters from the Rhineland coming to them. Some came from Spain, and of course some, so there's a lot of responsive collection of the Gaonim, and a lot of the rules that the Rishonim, who lived 1100, 1200, 1300, like the Rosh, the Rif, the Rambam, they relied on certain rules that the Gaonim had made in that period that we think of like the Dark Ages between 500 and 1000. It wasn't. The Gaonim were very active, and for Machzor Vitri, a lot of our Nusach was really honed during that period of time by the Gaonim. And so you see, here's a rule that the Rosh picked up from the Gaonic period, that we always follow the later Amoraim. Second, the opinion of Rav Nachman, according to which only garments of wool and linen are subject to tzitzit by Torah law, is the opinion of one authority opposing the majority. Rav Nachman was only one opinion, and the majority was Rachva, Rav Yehuda, and Rava. So there were two reasons why the Rosh paskined like Rava, that all garments are mechuyev and tzitzis min Torah. It's a huge machlokas, And we see the machlokas now, we see how we paskin. These two divergent traditions were cited by Rav Yosef Kar in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch. Ein chayv b'tzitzis b'nat Torah, ele beged pishtim or shel tzemer rechelim. That the obligation of tzitzis b'nat Torah, like, is only linen or wool. Aval bigdei sha'ar meaning ein chayv b'tzitzis b'nat all other garments b'nat. Who is the Shulchan Aruch himself holding like? The Rambam and the Rif, who were Sfardim, right? But we always said the Shulchan Aruch usually went 2 out of 3. Who is the triumvirate? The Rosh, the Rif, the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch is following his general rule, passing like 2 out of 3. Of course, the Ramah, who lives in Krakow, Yesh Oimrim de Kula Chav Midaraisa V'Hachi Hilchasa. So for us Ashkenazim, the halacha is like the Rosh, that all garments are mechuyev in tzitzis b'nat Torah. So somebody asks you, what's the obligation of tzitzis? You'll say it's machlokas, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah regarding whether all other garments are chayiv in tzitzis. The Shulchan Aruch adopts the position of the Rif and the Rambam, following his standard method, according to which he accepts the ruling which is shared by the Rif and the Rambam. Similarly, the Ramah adheres to his policy, according to which he adopts the view of the Rishonim of Ashkenaz. Thus, he rules that garments of all materials are subject to tzitzis by Torah law. With respect to the applications of the debate surrounding the basis for tzitzis in other materials, the Mishnah Brura, of course, the Mishnah Brura is the Chafetz Chaim, passed away in 1933, who's the main source of commentary on Orech Chaim that we have in modern vernacular. Mogen Avraham is in the Shulchan Aruch and then the Mishnah Brura in the more modern time. He cites 3 ramifications. In addition, although the Ramah rules that all fabrics are subject to tzitzis by Torah law, the Mishnah Brura advocates for a stringency based on the Sephardic position adopted by Rav Yosef Kar. But let's see what the Mishnah Brura says. Elamid Rabbanon, right? This is when the Mechaber, when Rav Yosef Kar says that other garments, Olomid Rabbanon, after Tzarech Levarach al Mitzvah Shemid Rabbanon Gamkein. The Mishnah Brura points out that doesn't make a difference. You still have to make a bracha, because we also make brachas on rabbinic mitzvahs. For example, Chanukah, Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. We still make a bracha on it. On Megillah, we make on Kiddush Yontif, which is rabbinic. We make a bracha on it. So he points out, don't think that you don't have to make a bracha. There's going to be some nafkaminas, the fact in the Yoiser Roy Lasses Beged Shu Yoiser Boimin HaTorah, that if you're going to make tzitzis out of a material that is mechayev in Torah. So, that's why you see people wearing woolen tzitzis, lefi the Mishnah Brura, because he says it's better to, according to all deos, make your tzitzis out of a garment that's one of those 2 garments, either wool or linen, to make your tzitzis out of. Number 2, in this Arev Lo Tzitzis Tavyon Lishmon, B'Shelo Lishmon. Now, one of the dinim of tzitzis is that tzitzis have to be woven l'shem tzitzis. You can't just buy abundant tzitzis. But let's say you have some strings that were woven l'shem tzitzis, and it got mixed with others that were not l'shem tzitzis. Kenny?
Hey, Doc.
I started the Tzurba Shir 15 minutes late. I didn't let you know that the daf is going to start a little later. It's going to start at 9:15 instead of 9.
Okay. Are you teaching now?
I am. I'm still teaching the Tzurba.
Okay, so we'll listen in for a few minutes, okay?
Exactly. So we're talking about the mitzvahs of tzitzis, that if the tzitzis that were woven lishma got mixed up with strings that are not lishma, the ein lo tzitzis acherim, he doesn't have any other strings, or sheyesh lo safek ala beged muchay b'tzitzis, he has a beged where it's in doubt whether or not it needs tzitzis. The imu mid rabbanon, if if as we said, as the Mechaber said, it's only rabbinic, then Tzveik Rabbanan Lakula. You can rule leniently, like we said before, Tzveik Rabbanan Lakula, and then Imhu Yoshev B'tzibur. If he's sitting publicly, V'nifsak Echad Mitzit Yosef, and one of his strings snap, B'chol, and it's not Shabbos. The Imhu Midrabanan, if it's a rabbinic law, Yesh Lomer Kavod Abriyas Doiched Rabbanan Ve'en Machuyev Tekef Lipshot Talito. Remember, for a person to take off his garment, it's going to embarrass him. And now he's wearing a garment that wouldn't have tzitzis, you'd have to take that off. But he's saying if it's only rabbinic, Kavod Abriyas takes precedence over Kavod Abriyas. That means human dignity is always paramount, even over a rabbinic law.
But why does it have to distinguish weekday, not Shabbos?
It's a good question. Who asked that question? It's a good question. Huh?
Jeff, me.
Maybe he snapped it. He wants to talk about chol, that a person snapped it, and he doesn't want that to happen on Shabbos. I don't see why it would be any difference.
Well, I think the problem is on Shabbos, it would be carrying. He has to take it off, because otherwise he goes in the street, it would be carrying.
What if he's indoors?
But there's a chash that maybe he'll wear it outside too, and therefore he will be carrying it.
There's no question if he's outdoors, that's the issue.
That's the
It could be an
concern.
issue of carrying, but if indoors, l'chora, I'm not sure why there would be a difference between Chol and Shabbos.
Well, it's a
Oh, you might come to
chash that
carry
he
it
might
out.
wear it outside. So you have
Right.
to take it off right away.
And then he says, "V'hachi hilchusa, v'yirei shamayim yachmir latzmo lochush l'dei harishoina." Somebody who's machmir on himself should follow the first opinion in the Shulchan Aruch, the Yaset Talis Shel Tzemer, should make his arbikanfos, his laptzedekel, his tzitzis out of wool. Kedei she'yitzchai b'tzitzis b'nator l'kul alma. Therefor, there'd be no machlokas. You'd be following both the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch. Therefore, just like our tarlesim are made out of wool, you see people that are machmir to wear woolen tzitzis.
Uh-oh.
That's this Mishnah Brura. However, Rav Avigdor Nebensal, the Rav of the Ir Atika, who teaches in Yeshivat HaKotel, many of us have had the opportunity to meet him personally. He's a wonderful Rav who's very open to meet him. You can go anytime into Yeshivat HaKotel, he's sitting in the same place for the last 50 years. You can go say Shalom Aleichem to him. He cites the Chazon Ish. Again, just to get everybody up to speed. The Chazon Ish passed away in 1954. He posek for the Eida Charedis, for the Yeshivish community until he passed away. And his laws, especially in Bnei Brak, are still dominant in that community. Chazon Ish grew up in Vilna and came to the Yishuv in 1940. The Rav Chaim Ozer, who was the Gadol Hador in Europe, sent him. They both lived in Vilna, and the Chazon Ish was sent to Israel, so he came very late. So and the Chazon Ish went all around Eretz Yisrael measuring the gvulim for Shemitah law, and all the mitzvahs atluyos ba'aretz are established by the Chazon Ish. There's a famous story that I was told. What was that guy? Rav Efi Tam. Efi Tam was a general who wore kippah through God. He was one of the first religious officers who was a high-ranking officer in Sahel. And he told the story. I heard him say the story himself. Efi Tam grew up in a kibbutz in the north, and his father drove a tractor on the field, and the Chazon Ish's car broke down, and he was out measuring for mitzvah atluyos ba'aretz. And Efi Tam's father in the tractor took the Chazon Ish on the tractor, drove him a whole way to a bus station so the Chazon Ish could go back home. And he gave him, so because he did that, he gave the father of Efi Tam a bracha. And I don't think he was a religious kibbutznik at the time. He gave a bracha that you're going to have a very special son, and he's going to be religious, and he's going to do. So, and Efietam became one of the first, religious officers because the Chazon Ish gave his father a bracha in that way. So Rav Avigdor Nebertzal cites the Chazon Ish, who notes an ironic potential pitfall born of the Mishnah Berurah's position. In the very warm and humid climate in Eretz Yisrael, wearing wool tzitzis may not be a source of benefit, but rather discomfort. If so, it may lose the status of a formal beged altogether, such that it would not be subject to the requirement of tzitzis even according to rabbinic law. Says the Yitzchak Yikare, Uv'shem HaChazon Ish Masur Shalolova Shtilus Cotton Shal Tzemer. The Chazon Ish, it's brought over that he did not wear tzitzis made out of wool. The Omer Shachar Tzemer, he felt it was too hot. Lachein Lagabav Ein Lashem Beged. It's not really called a beged. Kimavor B'toisus Maseches Nida. Shebeged Shenu Nene B'Livosho Ein Chayv Latil Bo Tzitzis. A garment that you wear that you're not really having pleasure from, you're not chayv to put tzitzis in it. The Hagon Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Amar Shekivan Shalov Shaloshem Mitzvah Choshiv Beged. He disagreed. He said since he wore it l'shem mitzvah, it was considered a garment. Anyways, the Yalkut Yosef writes, that's the Ovadia Yosef, writes that it is proper to be concerned for the position of the Shulchan Aruch and to seek to perform the mitzvah specifically with woolen tzitzis. Roy v'nachon lilbosh tolis adsui mitzemer rechelim. Your tzitzis, your lap tzedekah should be made out of wool. V'afat tzitziyosha yu asuyus mitzemer rechelim. And the tzitzis fringes, the strings, should also be made of wool. V'af b'mei hakayetz hachamim, even in the summer. Yesh li tamet, you should exert yourself. V'lilbosh talis cotton shel tzemer, wear a tzitzis made out of wool. V'onam heichad lo efshar lilbosh tzemer b'glal hacham, if it's too hot. You're going to be mevatel the mitzvah. Yilbash talis cotton asui mikutna, cotton, or sharminim. You will fulfill the chiyuv according to the most poskim who hold that you can wear any garment. We know who those are now. The Rosh, right, following Rava and Rachva, and of course the Ramah, the postik for Ashkenazim, that you can fulfill your mitzvah with cotton. But we can see the Mishnah Berurah said even for Ashkenazim, those who want to be machmer can be machmer from wool. Nowadays,
isn't the best answer then to wear linen?
Say again?
Linen isn't the best answer then to wear linen, which is cool and it's clearly a b'deraisa.
Right. So why? But yet all of these other tzitziyos were always made out of cotton. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe it was a cost issue. Not sure why.
Yeah, but nobody mentions in all the point of view that they should wear linen. Because that
Correct.
would avoid the Chazon Ish problem, and that's what you wear in the summer. Linens, that's what, people who aren't worried about shatnez. Anyway, it's an interesting.
It might have been harder to get.
Maybe.
Nowadays, a good number of Ashkenazim always wear a tzitzis garment made out of wool in order to fulfill the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch in accordance with the Mishnah Berurah's recommendation. Those who do not wear a woolen garment generally wear cotton and fulfill the Torah mitzvah in its entirety according to the Ramah and the Chazon Ish, no problem. On page 115, you'll see a basic, nice graphic version of basically everything we learned today. Let's continue. Page 116. Garments made of leather or synthetic materials. This we will not finish tonight, and we will continue this part next week and begin section 4, the next section of tzitzis. But let's start this area. Thus far, we have been discussing which materials are subject to the Torah level commandments to affix tzitzis, as opposed to those which are subject to a rabbinic obligation. By contrast, the Gemara Menachos observes that leather is exempt from the mitzvah of tzitzis altogether. Amar Rava, Ha Milsi Amri, the statement that I said, V'itma barav mishvei Rav Zer Kavasi, and there was a statement made in Eretz Yisrael by Rav Zera like me. He shall beged v'knafeh shel or. Let's say you had a garment, but the corners were made out of leather, chayeves. That would be chayev in tzitzis. He shall or v'knafeh shel beged. If the garment itself was leather and the corners were made out of material, ptura would be potter. My taima. Ikr beged be'inon. We go after the ikr beged. That means the majority of the beged. And chura from this Gemara, it seems that if the majority of the beged is made out of leather, it's potter from tzitzis. Rav Achai ozl basar knaf. Rav Achai would follow the corner to determine whether or not to have tzitzis or not, because that's how the Torah said it, knaf. So although the Gemara presents two opinions as to whether the determination for whether a garment requires tzitzis depends on the material of the garment itself or the material of the corner, it seems that all agree that a leather material is not subject to the mitzvah of tzitzis. The levush was a later posek after the Mogen Avram, but in between them, probably 1750, 1800, the levush adopts the exemption of leather garments as the practical halacha and explains the basis for this exception. Tzitzis is required specifically for those garments that are woven. Ein chayav mitzvah al davar nikra beged. It's got to fulfill a get of beged. Dichsiv, basulam tzitzis akanfei big dehem. Ubeged hu kol davar ha ne'erag ba'ariga. It has to be woven, the nasa beged. Lafuke mevushel or shen nikra beged. A leather garment is not called a beged. Even if it has 4 corners. Laficha, im hayat talit kulo shel beged. If the garment was made out of material, knafeh shel or, and its corners were leather, kloimer b'chol makom ha'arum, ein sham knaf. Wherever it's woven, there's no corner there. Elahu agul, it's round. The tougher born in that location, chatichas or, you put the piece of leather patches there, sham knaf made a corner. So chayev is betzitzis. Shekein mashma kanfei big dehem. Knafim shel beged you are knafim mashe you. Meaning, no matter what the corners are, we look at the beged itself. Aval he shel or. But if the garment was knafeh shel beged ptura. Shekevan sheikra mabush en shel beged lo karin kan katve big dehem. Since the main part of the malbush was not made out of that material, we don't call it kanfei big dehem. That which you should cover yourself. Mashma, but also achelik amechasas ikra guf. We look at the garment that's covering most of your body, below shoto. So the knaf is not covering most of your body. Both talamitzuk dian tasa bein lechiv bein leptur. So in light of the Gemara's explicit exemption of leather, poskim in the modern era have discussed whether this status should also apply to synthetic garments such as nylon. Mesh tzitzits are often made from these materials, and their status will be subject to the dispute among the poskim discussed here, whether you can use nylon. Should they be compared to silks and other natural materials, which are subject to the mitzvah of tzitzis by Torah or rabbinic law? Or should they be likened to leather, which seems to be exempt? This question is debated by 2 great 20th century authorities, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, the Har Tzvi, who sat on the Beis Din HaGadol when the chief rabbi Rav Herzog was alive. You're talking about 1950s. And Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank wrote a lot of halacha about how do you run electric utilities on Shabbos, how do you do the army on Shabbos. He was that posek in that generation at the time that the state was created, that was on the Beit Din HaGadol when Rav Herzog was the chief rabbi. That is a very important posek. And of course, Rav Moshe Feinstein. And we're going to learn these truvas of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank and Rav Moshe next week as it relates to this issue of nylon and synthetic material. We'll have the Tzitz Eliezer, Piskei Truvos, but so I will leave you like a little bit of Perils of Pauline in the middle of the sugya, like a cliffhanger, so we have something to look forward to next week. I think I'm dating myself with that Perils of Pauline comment. Anyways, any questions?
Jeff Astroff laughed at that joke.
Comments? Okay. Everybody have a good week. Mario, we're going to do the daf now.